The question is that the document be noted. I call the honourable member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, custodians of the land on which this parliament stands. I also acknowledge the Wiradjuri people. The Wiradjuri people represent the Riverina and Central West area I proudly represent in this place, and a lot of people have told me asked me since the redistribution of the electorate boundaries, what does the bottom of the electorate around Euron Creek and Wagga Wagga have in common with the top of the electorate, Forbes and Parks and right up to Peak Hill? And true, the Central West more relates to Orange and Dubbo, and the southern part of the electorate around Wagga Wagga more relates to the natural Riverina, the geographical area, coordinating in with the Murrumbidgee irrigation area, as well as the snowy mountains of Tumut and Tumbarumba. Well, there is one thing, Mr Deputy Speaker, and that is the fact that it is all Wiradjuri country. All Wiradjuri country. I also acknowledge the member for Lingiari. 42% of his constituents are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I know the great work that he has done, not just in his electorate, but on a national stage to help the plight of the Aboriginal people he represents, and I acknowledge that. As the Small Business Minister, I also want to acknowledge the fantastic work that Senator Nigel Scullion, the Indigenous Affairs Minister, has done for procurement for Aboriginal small businesses, because we know that the best way out of welfare is for a job. We know that the best way to get ahead in this world is to have income and to run a business and to be able to make a profit that way. The original target set for contracts for Aboriginal procurement in 2015-16 was 0.5% of Commonwealth domestic contracts. This acknowledged the very low base, given the Commonwealth procured only $6.2 million from Indigenous businesses in 2012-13. In just the Coalition's first year, we have so far surpassed the targets. Under the Coalition's new procurement policy, the Commonwealth has awarded more than 1,500 direct and indirect contracts to almost 500 Indigenous businesses worth a total of more than $284 million. That is a credit to Senator Scullion. This is almost 46 times the value of Indigenous contracts awarded by the Commonwealth in 2012-13. The Coalition is immediately bringing forward to this financial year its 2020 target to award 3% of contracts to Indigenous businesses, nearly 3 years ahead of schedule. Although more than half, 56% of the total value of Indigenous business contracts were awarded in the building, construction and maintenance sector, what makes the IPP so remarkable is the range of businesses which have successfully tendered for work under this policy. These include businesses which produce information and communications technology products, as well as service providers in the recruitment and legal and financial industries, Deputy Speaker. Through the Council of Australian Governments, we are continuing to work with the states and territories to get them to introduce their own Indigenous procurement policies, and I call on them to redouble these efforts. I want to acknowledge, Deputy Speaker, some of the Aboriginal people making some really good initiatives and really being fine role models in the Wiradjuri areas I represent, namely Kath Withers, Isabel Reid, Gail Clark, each of whom do wonderful welcomes to country. Whether it's Australia Day, whether it's any event that's going on in and around Wagga Wagga and Coolaman, these three wonderful Aboriginal elders are always there, and they're always talking about inclusivity, also talking about the need for all of us to be united. We heard from the previous speaker about Clontarf, which has a great program at Mount Austin High School, a fantastic rugby league program. It's rolling out to get more Indigenous youth not just playing sport, but interested in turning up for school and participating in that way to make sure that they get a greater education. And we heard from the Prime Minister today how education is the great enabler for Indigenous youth. Stan Grant Sr., father of Stan Grant, who we know through the media, but his dad has done some great work with a couple of editions of the Wiradjuri Dictionary to make sure that the language used over thousands of years is not only in a form that is able to be used now, but will last forever. Hugh Wyman, Vietnam veteran and a great mate of mine, always is helping out Aboriginal youth talking about the great positives that there are in society today and getting the younger generation interested in taking part in everything that is happening, both on a sporting front but also particularly in military representation, and making sure that Aboriginal veterans are always at the forefront of our minds. New South Wales, as I say, I represent an area in New South Wales which is large and which is diverse, but which is all Wiradjuri country. The 6.1% of the population in the Riverina electorate is made up of Indigenous people. As the Prime Minister and others have mentioned today, closing the gap remains a priority for this government. It remains a priority for our parliament. To reiterate some of the key highlights of the report released today, as a nation we have made progress in specific areas. Significant improvements in the proportion of Indigenous 20 to 24-year-olds achieving Year 12 or equivalent. At high levels of education, there is almost no employment gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. There are significant improvements in health. We have seen a significant decline in mortality rates, greater access to antenatal care, reduced rates of smoking, reduction in mortality from chronic diseases and declining infant mortality rates. And just before I came into the chamber to talk on this important motion, I've met the National Rural Health Alliance, the Chief Executive Officer David Butt and Senior Policy Advisor Alexis Mohay, who outlined the key priorities of the Alliance. And one of those is to improve the health outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, which worsens with increasing remoteness, and the member for Lingiari would know that better than anyone. We need, the Alliance says in its key priorities document, greater focus on improving child health, education and wellbeing, and to support Indigenous families to give them the best start in life. It should involve a holistic early childhood strategy which informs high-quality, locally responsive and culturally appropriate programs with stable long-term funding. And one of the other key priorities of the 5 that the National Rural Health Alliance, former chairman of which is Dr Paul Murrah from Gundagai in my electorate, says that is important, is that the organisation supports the best start in life for mothers and babies, focusing on the first 1,000 days from conception to the age of 2. We heard the Prime Minister enunciate just this very message in his wonderful speech today. The Alliance believes that the best investment in the long-term health and wellbeing of children, Australia's future, is in ensuring that they have the best possible start in life. There would be no one in this room, no one in this building which would not agree with that. The Alliance argues that we should build on the First 1,000 Days program, which targets Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities as an exemplar program to support women and children across all communities. But other key factors of the report released today is reading and numeracy are improving for Indigenous children, and that is a wonderful thing. There has been a significant increase for Indigenous female employment over the longer term, and whilst we celebrate our achievements, we don't hide from the fact, as a government, as a parliament, that there is more to do, much more to do, Deputy Speaker, to support our Indigenous population. In the Riverina and Central West, there are areas which we need to improve. Some I'm hopeful that we can address, including encouraging better school attendance. As at 2015 in the Riverina, 87.4% of Indigenous children attended school, compared with 92.6%. And supporting Indigenous people to find work, the Indigenous people unemployment rate is 17.1% compared to 4.9% for the non-Indigenous population. And those figures certainly give us room to improve. On a national level, the government has targets. These targets are important and focus our attention on the areas which we as a country need to do better, much better. The government will continue to work to halve the gap in child mortality for Indigenous children under 5 by 2018, close the gap in life expectancy by 2031, 95% of all Indigenous 4-year-olds enrolled in early childhood education by 2025, close the gap in school attendance by the end of next year, halve the gap in reading, writing and numeracy for Indigenous students by next year, halve the gap in Year 12 attainment by 2020, halve the gap in employment outcomes by 2018. They're big goals. I appreciate they're long-range goals for some of them, but they are goals which we must achieve, not just for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but for all communities, because together as one we need to do these, and together as one we need to stand as a nation that is proud of our record for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.